huge.
Cheyenne just walked the man. They most get sick the man. Uden ha hujan, eskenande man, dandel hujan man.
Esendande utia, eskni hen of Mation. Shedon chick, esken schwaden, as you just speak.
Habega itukt, zagone deitung, zaganuk sik, as was naus, mskugabu, daboy yeit, as was naus, stitanu.
Open Taujin, Dabanuk Shandu Sachi Wowin. Nigga mooch Ginny Goom, he the now wow. Just chime it and now wow. Just Satchity now wow.
Help if I unmute. Good morning. Welcome to Native Life, our special event. This is the second day of the symposium for Indigenous Climate Justice. It's being held at the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. And Richard Green is bringing us a stream. He's in the process of setting up. So the song you just heard is Norwegian. It's a translation of a popular song that came out in 2013 or 2012. Was recorded in 2014. I put the translation in the video so that it would make sense to folks. The project itself is one of, they have a live truck that goes around to the various villages, and they get the young people who have talent to sing the lyrics in their own language to popular songs or to songs that professional writers have written. And then they take them and compile them. They've put out a couple of CDs now. I think that they have a lot of talent and should be promoted. I'll have the information about that particular song if you're interested in buying it on the native-life.net website. Later on, probably Saturday, because I have a day job and I'm taking a couple hours from it, and I'm going to have to work a couple hours late. So this is an all volunteer organization here, and so we do what we can and take care of what we can. Now the panel that's going to be meeting today is going to be talking about the coal trains. Coal trains are running from the various reservations and through the various reservations out to the Pacific Northwest coast to be shipped to primarily to the Orient, or the oil, which isn't going in pipelines yet, but they want to put in pipelines out to be processed. And we're going to be hearing from several folks on the Fossil Fuel Connections panel, and there'll be tribal voices from the front and back ends of the oil and coal train routes. We'll be hearing from Fawn Sharp, who is president of Quinault Indian Nation and the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians, and she'll be talking about the Grace Harbor oil terminals that have been proposed. Kandi Mossett is a Fort Berthold tribal member, and she's part of the Indigenous Environmental Network. And if you tuned in last night to hear Tom Goldtooth speak, he is the executive director of the Indigenous Environmental Network. And she's going to be speaking on oil fracking in North Dakota. She'll be coming to us via Skype. Then there's two more people that will be speaking. Jeremiah Julius of the Lummi Nation, and he's a council member. And he's going to be talking about the Cherry Point coal terminal that's been proposed. And then we have Adriann Killsnight, who's a North Cheyenne tribal member, also working with the Ecoregional Ethnographic Assessment Project on a planned Otter Creek coal mine and Tongue River Railroad in southeast Montana. So it should be fairly interesting. We've got quite a bit of new information that will be coming to us. I am not familiar on any of these topics other than to say that, I'm aware of the coal trains and the oil trains, as we all are, through the media when we hear about accidents. Finding out that they're trying to put in more facilities which will, increase the traffic that's coming through is something that we need to get behind, and we need to try and cut this down, because we need to shift away from fossil fuels. We're always going to need some, because you need a certain amount of oil and plastic production and things like that we've become used to, and when you're talking about shifting away from an oil-based economy, you have to start somewhere. And so we'll start with the biggest things like our cars and how we heat our houses and things like that. Well, how we make electricity. Those you're looking at right now is a map of the various routes of the oil and coal trains and where they're coming from. You've got the Bakken oil shale basin, there's the Alberta tar sands, and there's the Powder River coal basin. And so extractive technologies that are occurring on native reservations or near native reservations, and the various routes. And as you can see, they're crossing a number of watersheds. They're it's not if, again, it's when there's an issue on shipping oil and shipping coal to various areas of the country. So I'm going to look here at the comments, and I'm looking at last night's, and that's not where I need to be. I need to be on number 2, and it's, there we go. Obama just rejected the Keystone Pipeline. Yay. Yes. Yes. But you know, this is just a battle. We've won a battle. This is not winning the war. We can't relax. We need to lobby our elected officials to pass laws that make it harder for them to even consider putting in any of this stuff. Right now, you know, we've managed at the 11th hour, and with the right elected officials in place to be able to stop it, but we're not going to be able to stop it if we don't keep vigilant, and if we don't make sure that laws are changed. Because, you know, well, they're waiting on the price of oil to go back up. You know what they're going to be doing? They're going to be trying to get elected officials in at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, to put in laws that will make it easier next time for them to be able to do this. And if we don't take action and keep up the pressure on our elected officials to pass laws that strengthen the personal property, that they can't just go ahead and you know, ramrod an oil line through your farm or through your property, we need to get laws in place and rules in place that say that no, you can't do that. We don't want it. It's been rejected, and we don't want this kind of thing ever again. And the only way to do that is to be preemptive, in my humble opinion, or not so humble opinion. And Cynical Girl brings up, we still have the TPP to deal with, and the TPP can come back and say, well, you know, that cuts into our profits, so you guys got to change all these laws, because you know, it's against the TPP, and we'll take your country to the World Trade Organization court and fine you all kinds of money. So there's all of those issues. It's not even you know, the fact that we've got these things out there. Corporations are I mean, they bought our government. They bought it a long time ago. They bought the other governments of the world too. You hear on the news, well, the U.S. government did this and the U.S. government did that. No, Exxon did this and Mobil did that, and they're just doing the bidding of the people that they take money from. I see that we're starting to get a little bit of a feed from the venue, and they should be starting soon. They were supposed to start at 1 o'clock, but as I explained last night, there's clock time, and then there's Indian time. Indian time starts whenever everybody is ready. And obviously we're not quite ready yet, although it looks like we're getting folks coming up to the podium now. I see the professor is wandering around up there. And he was very good to put this all together. I've learned a lot, and I really enjoyed Tom Goldtooth's speech last night.
That probably hasn't heard.
We have audio.
POTUS rejected Keystone. It's a good day for us. And, last night we had a great speaker. He was looking at the big picture of what we have to do to work on the environment in the future. I agree with everything he had to say. but I'm what you would call an incrementalist, so I take small bites. Okay? And then I turn around with these small bites, and I think, oh, that's a big step. So his vision, although I agree with it, is just a huge task. That, too big to take on because we have to change so many things in order to make it happen. So, you know, how do we turn capitalism down? You know, we have too many people in the world that are constantly saying, what's in it for me? You know, so they're always looking for something. So, so that's difficult. So he has a vision, and I think we should march towards it, but then a step at a time until we get it done. So that's my point of view of last night, and for this conference, I'm really enjoying the conference. There's some good ideas. Yesterday, students made some great presentations, and in fact, one of them is my student in the MPH demonstration program. So she did an excellent job. So her capstone's coming up, so now she's got to talk about it. So. But anyway, I want to thank you all for coming. I'm really looking forward today, and especially listening to my friend, President Von Sharp over here, on her discussion. So let's have a good conference today. Enjoy the day, because the environment had a win. Thank you.
So our second speaker, I'd like to introduce the president of the Evergreen State College, George Bridges.
Good morning, everyone. It is an honor and privilege to have you all here. Can everyone in the back hear me? In the back, can you hear? Good. I want to acknowledge the very important representatives we have here. Certainly, President Von Sharp from the Lummi Nation, and also a very prominent leader in First Nations, Indigenous peoples issues around the country. Thank you, President Sharp, for joining us. For the other speakers and panelists, for Councilman Julius for his role in the Lummi tribe, and him being here, and all of the students, faculty, staff at Evergreen. We welcome you and are delighted to be a part of this. Let me make just a few remarks as a matter of introduction, and then we will turn to the great panelists that we have. I think we all acknowledge that Evergreen State College is on ceded territory. Territory ceded to the state of Washington as a part of the Medicine Creek Treaty tribes, Squaxin Island, Nisqually, and Puyallup. And that as a state institution, we are stewards of this property. We don't own it. It is our responsibility and obligation to engage and consult with Washington tribal nations in all of our educational work, and keeping with the 1989 Centennial Accord and the 1999 New Millennium Agreement we have. And you should know, for those of you who are new to the college, last year Evergreen hosted the annual Centennial Accord meeting between the governor and the tribal leaders right here in the Longhouse, right where we are sitting today. And this symposium, this gathering around climate issues and the relationship of our First Nations, Indigenous peoples, is an embodiment of that state-tribal relationship. Very, very important to Evergreen, very important to the state of Washington and the tribes. So we welcome all of you, particularly President Sharp, Councilman Julius, as honored officials, and welcome the tribal speakers and guests who have joined us. it's very clear that Indigenous peoples, First Nations peoples, have been the first affected and perhaps the most deeply affected by the climate change crisis, even though they contribute the very least to greenhouse gases and the forces that have produced this crisis. Yet their voices, their ideas, their knowledge has largely been ignored in the national discourse on climate change. And I think the voice of the late Nisqually leader, Bill Frank Jr., often echoed here at treaty gatherings, urges us to listen to the time-tested beliefs and knowledge of Native Americans in relation to our natural world. Evergreen encourages interdisciplinary study and understanding of major social problems, and certainly the relationship between environmental sustainability and climate justice. And in that capacity, examining biodiversity, cultural diversity, Indigenous voices, Indigenous knowledge must be front and center in climate change discussions on our campus. We will not ignore those voices and that knowledge. We must. Native nations have much to tell, many can offer to this discourse, and their treaty rights, the laws and treaty song, secure their power in co-management of issues that are so central to the economy of Washington State. The iconic part of the Food Network, and certainly can be seen in the practices of our tribes and their successful salmon habitat restoration programs. We at Evergreen are immensely proud to play a very small part in those and other programs. The issues of climate change and fossil fuel shipping will continue to be sources of concern and challenges that we as a state, we as people of Washington must address. And I, like John McCoy, an incrementalist, I believe that, like the Iron Curtain and the Berlin Wall, it did come down. But it took many years of pounding on that wall for it to fall. The challenges we face in our climate are even bigger, even more difficult to surmount. But we will change. We will address them, and we must. It is a journey that we will take, and it will take a long time. But we must embrace that journey. So in doing so, we can look to tribal nations, tribal peoples, as providing pathways for us to follow on this journey. And as President Obama told tribal chairs at a meeting in the White House in 2009, and I quote, "We have a lot to learn from your nations in order to create the kind of sustainability in our environment that we so desperately need." So thank you for coming, engage the challenges, and embrace this issue. It is critical to our world, our nation, and we are honored all to be here to have these guests. Thank you.
I'd like to invite up our speakers to come up on stage, all the speakers to come on up. I'm Zoltan Grossman on the faculty in Geography and Native Studies. And if you look in your program, there's a map that shows a little bit of what we're talking about today. We think of energy corporations as having global reach and being all-powerful and being able to donate to campaigns and control our politics. But they have a certain vulnerability, a certain Achilles heel, and that is in the area of shipping fossil fuels. The three interior basins, the Bakken Oil Shale Basin, the Powder River Coal Basin, and the Alberta tar sands are all located in the interior of the continent. They have to ship that fossil fuel out to the coasts, in particular in the Pacific Northwest, a very climate-conscious region in order for it to reach the global market. And they have to ship in equipment to be able to extract some of that. So in a sense, we have a geographical responsibility as a thin green line between those fossil fuel basins. And that fossil fuel, if it stays in the ground, will be less damaging to our climate. So what we have here today at the symposium are voices, indigenous voices from both ends of both the coal train routes and the oil train routes. Don't know if this has ever been done before, but we have President Fawn Sharp of the Quinault Indian Nation and affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians. We have Kandi Mossett, a Fort Berthold tribal member from the other end of the oil train route in western North Dakota, where the Bakken oil fracking is taking place. We have Jeremiah Julius from the Lummi Nation, which is facing the Cherry Point coal terminal, and Adriann Killsnight from northern Cheyenne, where they are trying to stop coal mines that would be the source of the coal that would be loaded on the trains into the Pacific Northwest. So we're trying to get a sense of those fossil fuel connections. And the symposium is an outgrowth of the Climate Change and Pacific Rim Indigenous Nations project that started here at Evergreen at the Northwest Indian Applied Research Institute in 2006. And the Symposium Planning Committee, if they could stand when I read out their names, Shangri-La Joshi Win, who's really an inspiration for the symposium, and MES and the Climate Justice, Karen Gall, Sustainability Ecology, Debbie McMett, tribal MPA grad who's been in the project since the beginning, with Dr. Hunter and myself, Michael Lane, tribal MPA, Michael McCarty, who's former McCaw chair, and now working with the Nisqually Tribal Council. He's in DC with the chairman, so couldn't join us today. And finally, I'd like all the students from our program that Karen and I are teaching, Resource Rebels, Environmental Justice Movements, Building Hope, who have been incredible help and assistance in putting on the symposium. Couldn't have done it without them. If they could all stand up and receive that. And we have other programs present today, the graduate program on the environment, or MES, Master of Public Administration, Tribal Governance. The President's Diversity Fund has helped put this on, Academic Dean's Office, Center for Community-Based Learning and Action, Clean Energy Committee, Clean Energy Education Research and Action, and the programs Engaging with the Endangered Northwest, Shipping Out and Riding Home, Caliban and the Witch, Even When Erased, We Exist, and the graduate Conceptualizing Our Regional Environment Program and Introduction to Environmental Studies. So welcome to the symposium. And the first speaker that we want to hear from is the president of the Quinault Indian Nation and the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians. She's been president of Quinault since 2006 and was very recently reelected to a fourth term. She's an attorney with an academic background in criminal justice, holds an advanced certificate in international human rights law from Oxford University. President Sharp formerly served as managing attorney and lead counsel for the Quinault government, and associate judge and as administrative law judge for the Washington State Department of Revenue Tax Appeals Division. While president of Quinault, she was elected by the 57-member government organization, the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians, or ATNI, as their president in 2011, and serves also as the Northwest Regional Vice President for the National Congress of American Indians, or NCAI. She completed 2 years of service as chair of the U.S. Department of the Interior's Secretarial Commission on Indian Trust Administration and Reform. I'd like to welcome you to Evergreen.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate, and I'm honored for the invite today. Whenever I come to a forum like this, I know that there's going to be a great deal of inspiration, ideas, and certainly solutions for going forward into the future. I was told I had 15 minutes, and what I think I'm going to do in the 15 minutes is offer 3 basic thoughts. I want to, first of all, address Quinault's very broad global perspective of the environmental challenge and global crisis that we're facing with climate change. Within that context, I'd like to secondly talk about the decision and work we're doing with regard to crude oil and why that makes sense for us to take the position that we're taking. And then third, I think it'd be helpful to leave you with some recommendations and thoughts on what I think we need to do going forward to contend with not only a crisis, but a major public policy decisions facing us in the present day political environment. So first of all, I think it's important to talk about Quinault's perspective on the global crisis itself. We are facing many challenges at Quinault. We are on the front line of the impacts of climate change. In fact, I was in Washington just 2 days ago testifying on the Tribal Coastal Resiliency Act, where I was able to provide some very clear pictures to Congress in a PowerPoint presentation of some of the impacts that we're facing at Quinault. I've had to declare 2 states of emergency in the last 2 years. The ocean is breaching into our village. We're now having to relocate our entire village to the upper areas of our community just to protect and provide some safety for our citizens. And that is just one issue that we're facing, but there's another significant issue to the east. Our glaciers are melting. So we're trying to restore our blueback spawning habitat and our sockeye runs that historically millions of salmon would swim into the Quinault watershed, up to the lake and the upper reaches. Millions in the 50s and 60s. The year after I got elected, we only had 4,000 sockeye, Quinault blueback, and that's a very specific species that's unique to Quinault. And so we know that some of the glaciers and things that feed the river keep the waters cool, and it helps regulate things. I took a helicopter flight to see how much the glacier had receded. It totally disappeared. The glacier was gone when we came over the ridge. And so to the west, the ocean's breaching. To the east, our glaciers are disappearing. And not only that, we're dealing with a lot of macro environmental issues. Ocean acidification, this large warming blob that's moving down the coast. So within that context, we, about 10 years ago, really started to take up the issue of climate change. And it was frustrating to me as a young president back then, because anytime I would raise the issue of climate change in a meeting, the room would kind of get quiet, and then the next speaker would shift the conversation to something else. It was almost as though, one, people were, there's still a lot of skepticism about climate change. Two, how do we even begin to talk about it? Couldn't even get a dialogue going. And so Quinault reached out to the international community because we thought, there's a lot of people outside the United States that are very concerned about this. We went to the Conference of Parties, COP14, in Poznan, Poland, and had bilateral discussions with major countries. One either had a foreign policy on indigenous peoples, or two, that were very committed to climate change and partnering with tribal citizens and indigenous peoples. Tom Bolton actually was at COP14 and worked with us, and it was an experience where he went to the United States State Department area and alerted them that there's political leadership here at the Conference of Parties from an indigenous nation that wants to reach out with other countries. We were there later to knock on the door to talk about this position Quinault has, and maybe we can get an audience here. We got the 6-inch door treatment. The official opened the door and said, there was another Indian here an hour ago. Can't all you Indians get together? I said, one person. That was the response that we had. But other countries, Denmark met with us, Germany, and they were very interested. So we knew 10 years ago that the crisis that we're facing is so critical. And we need not only the science and good public policy, indigenous knowledge is critical, it's a key. We need to draw on all forms of knowledge to solve this global crisis. And the thing about the solutions, and this is what I emphasize over and over with the officials we met with, as well as some of the corporations, we talked to Dow Industries of Europe and explained, if you come out to an indigenous community, you can see a system from glacier to ocean with no development. You don't have to concoct it in an R&D lab. come out and see how we are stewards of the environment. You can see proven solutions, and they're not proven for today's generation. They're proven through the centuries. From the beginning of time, these are our historical practices. So that's sort of Quinault's perspective on dealing with this global crisis and climate change. Then comes along this project to open up terminals to export crude oil through Grace Harbor. Now, if you could understand the perspective we have with this first issue that I shared with you, you could understand how outraged we were that there was a proposal to bring this type of project into our ancestral territories and lands, where we're already dealing with macro environmental issues for which there's hope, but we need to be very cautious with those decisions for which we do have control over. We don't have any control over putting a glacier back up in the mountains. We can't make the ocean less acidic. We can't stop an ocean from physically breaching and taking out our coastlines, our cultural resources. So those very few decisions for which we do have control over, we need to be cautious. We can't be short-sighted. We can't be narrow-minded. We can't let profits drive that decision. We need to draw on all knowledge and make informed decisions. And that's not only true for Indigenous communities, but for the average citizen. The average citizen needs to know that their elected officials are exercising the public trust for which they're sworn to uphold to make the right decisions based on all information, based on science, based on culture, based on history, not just on the almighty dollar and profits. And that's been our long-standing position, because it's not just for today, it's future generations that are going to have to deal with that aftermath. So, logically, does it make sense to put millions of crude oil in storage just off the coastline, where there's a Cascadia subduction zone, we're vulnerable to earthquakes and tsunamis? In retrospect, when there was a tsunami and large-scale earthquake in Japan, the whole world asked, why did you put a nuclear plant right next to the ocean and a tsunami zone? Makes no sense. Big red flag, major decision, and you're going to put people in harm's risk. I don't care how safe these trains are. Once that crude oil is there on the coast and we're vulnerable, it would absolutely wipe out our entire fishery, not only for Quinault, but all the citizens in that area. Third point, final point, what can we do going forward? From my perspective, having sessions like this is so important, because I personally believe that the solutions to this global crisis, we have answers in our communities and our traditional knowledge and who we are as Indigenous peoples. And guess what? The rest of the world is starting to discover and appreciate that. When we talk about things like, with Chief Seattle, all things are connected. What we do to the environment, we do to ourselves. They're getting it. And people have gotten it for many years. But we need to be prepared with that knowledge base, because I predicted 10 years ago, when people were still skeptical about this, at some point in the future, there's going to be a sense of urgency. There's going to be a sense of urgency. Forest fires, hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, landslides. And we need to be prepared with solutions. And I firmly believe that tribal nations and Indigenous knowledge is key to that. So we need to do our work at home. Look at that traditional knowledge and science, share it in sessions like this, broaden our knowledge base, and really understand how we can bring our unique perspective to solve a global crisis, because what we have is a critical part of that. Second thing, bring along your young people. This is not going to be solved in our lifetime. This is going to be an ongoing challenge. It's critically important, and I'm glad to see so many young people in this room, because it's those generations that are going to be positioned to implement and execute much of what we plan today. And if we can build a solid foundation of Indigenous knowledge, bring our young people along as we develop that body of knowledge and share it, that would be so important for them and the future work that they will have in front of them. Third thing, build alliances. We have so many key partners outside of our tribal communities that feel just as strongly as we do. And they're willing to partner, they're willing to share and amplify that voice. And I know that voice is going to get louder and louder and louder. And that's up to us. We can't be reactionary and wait for that opportunity. We need to build that momentum, and I'm so happy to see that today we have so much more momentum than we did in years past. Fourth thing, let's go into this together with a good, solid attitude and state of mind. Let's not look at it as daunting and seemingly impossible. Let's be inspired and know we have the answers within our communities, and we have the answers together. Let's have faith and trust and know that we have the ability to work together to effectuate change and make this a better place for future generations. Let's not let the political dynamic of this issue dissuade us. Let's go into sessions and planning, whatever line of work you have, with a good heart, and trust the knowledge that you have, that you're there for good reason and good purpose, and you have something to contribute. Let's not be dissuaded by that and play that game. With or without them, we can come together and provide solutions. Those who choose to be short-sighted and narrow and look at corporate capital interests and money, leave them behind. With or without them, we're going forward, and we are going to make this a better place for future generations. No question about it, and together we can do that. On behalf of the North Nation and ATNI, I thank you once again for this opportunity. Thank you.
So this event is being live streamed. It will also be available on the web after today. Our second speaker is Kandi Mossett from the Fort Berthold Reservation in western North Dakota, Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara. She graduated from the University of North Dakota's Earth System Science and Policy program in 2006. She began working for the Indigenous Environmental Network as the Tribal Campus Climate Challenge organizer in 2007, engaging with many dozens of tribal colleges to support initiatives that connect students to environmental justice and climate justice issues in their communities, in line with Indigenous traditional knowledge and belief systems. She has served as IEN's Native Energy and Climate Campaign organizer, and basically tells our speaker last night, Tom Goldtooth, what to do in that area. So welcome, Kandi.
Thank you. Okay. I didn't know I was next. I need to get my screen up for you guys to see what I'm going to be talking about. So, let me do that. Okay. What do you see? I don't know why people are laughing. Can you see?
There you go.
Okay, I'll take that as a good time. So hello friends and relatives, my name is Eagle Woman. I am a Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara woman from what is today called Fort Berthold in North Dakota. And I work with a small nonprofit, you might have heard of us before, the Indigenous Environmental Network. And I want to share with you a little bit about my home and fracking and where I'm from. And so this map shows you North Dakota, and in the purple, what you see is the Fort Berthold Reservation. It is about 1 million acres inside, and it is right in the middle of the Williston Basin watershed area. And what we're dealing with now is the Bakken Shale Formation within our Williston Basin, which you can see in the red. And the reservation that I'm from that I just showed you is right in the middle of the Bakken Shale. It's actually called the sweet spot of the Bakken Shale Formation. And so one of the first things we started dealing with on our reservation was this, train terminals coming through a trailer court that my brother lived in, and we were displaced. We were forced to move out of there. We had to fight back to get assistance to be able to get people moved, but we didn't have a choice. We had to leave this area because this particular plot of land, even though it's on the reservation, was owned by non-Native people. Because of how our reservation is allotted into different sections, some of which are owned by non-Native folks. And the person that owns this rail line is Warren Buffett. So we were going up against a lot. This used to be a field. What I'm showing you here is an overhead picture. In the background is Lake Sakakawea, also known as the Missouri River. And this field, which used to produce wheat, is now belongs to Dakota Plains LLC, one of the rail terminals. And so the trains come in, they go through that big white building, they load up with all that volatile, explosive oil that you hear about. And this is right near the little town where I grew up. There's people that live really close to here. There's a whole entire town called Newtown with about 1,500 residents that live right near this rail terminal. And this is what we started seeing in North Dakota, right around where I live. As soon as the 2005 Energy Act passed, the very next year we started hearing murmurings about oil. And so when we look out on our landscape, we started seeing, instead of wheat fields, we saw industrial zone fields. People started leasing out their land for the industry to come in. And this is very, very, very bad, not only for our farming, but also for our ranching. This past year, I had a lot of people calling me, telling me that there were cattle that were being born deformed, that's something that they had never seen before at home. And so it's very important that people understand just some of the effects and impacts that happen when fracking comes and destroys water and destroys aquifers. Even though the companies say nothing will happen environmentally, they're flat out lying to individuals about fracking and development. For example, in Tioga, a few years back, a farmer here owned this land and they had an oil spill, oil blowout. And because of fracking, they use a lot of chemicals. It's not just crude oil anymore. It's a mixture of toxins that go down into the pipe and eventually come back out with the produced water, and also it mixes with some of the oil. This is 7 football fields in size. This is an aerial photo. This farmer is now suing the industry, the company that was there, because nothing is growing in this area. And this was in 2012, and nothing will grow anywhere where that touched. And often what we see when I'm at home now is just truck traffic. It's truck after truck after truck. They're hauling oil, they're hauling produced water, they're hauling fresh water, back and forth to all the various sites that have been set up, tearing up all of the BIA roads and our county roads. None of the stuff that happens on the Fort Berthold Reservation falls underneath the state. And so when you hear statistics coming out of North Dakota, they don't even include the statistics of what we're dealing with on the reservation. We're dealing with a lot of dust pollution, but also the sulfur dioxide, the carbon monoxide. And this is actually causing a decrease in the yields of our crops at home. North Dakota was what's called the breadbasket of the country. We feed a large portion of the country with our beef and with our crops. But the North Dakota State University has been doing a study that has shown just from the dust that has been settling, our yields are declining. And 5 years ago, we used to be able to look out over our buttes and see for miles and miles and miles. And now, just 5 years later, we see ozone, we see all kinds of smog out in the sky, just as a result of this industry moving into our area that we had never seen before. So imagine what people are breathing in. We have areas that are sacred to us. This is near Twin Buttes on the reservation. My grandmother used to fast in this area, and now we're not even allowed to go there. All these signs are up that say danger, danger, danger. Of course, I walk in there, there's nobody that's actually sitting there regulating this. They just put up signs and tell you, don't go here. When we start having spills and pipeline breaks on the reservation, we often don't even find these for anywhere from 3 to 4 months. This one was found because it caved in eventually. And this was right by Lake Sakakawea, again, the Missouri River. They told us, don't worry, we're going to put all these sandbags out here. And these sandbags are going to stop this oil from getting into the lake back there in the background. This coulee ran right into the lake, and the final word that we got about this was there was no contamination. We have trucks that spill produced water, which is not just salt water, not just brine water. It is chemical, toxic, poisonous water. On the reservation, they spill it right on the roads. And they continue to do this today. And we continue to turn these people in, but by the time a sheriff gets there or a tribal cop gets there, they're gone. And because of our jurisdiction issues on the reservation, a tribal cop can't pull over a white truck driver, and if they do, they have to wait for the sheriff to come. Sometimes the sheriff don't show up for 2 or 3 hours at a time, and so often the tribal cop has to leave when something else happens because it's just, there's so much crime, it's so crazy that that person just drives away. And they do it on the back roads, they dump on gravel roads. This was near my dad's house near Twin Buttes, where they were just putting produced water right onto a gravel road near wheat fields, near farming land. And all of the pad sites out here, this is what they look like. You can see standing water right on top of the dirt. There's no linings in these pad sites. And this guy's just standing here with a chemical tank. The blue square ones are the bad ones that contain all those chemicals. He's just standing there filling up his truck. Water's leaking all over, and that's the way the industry operates out here. They have evaporation ponds where they put this toxic, poisonous water to make it just go away. Eventually it evaporates. There was a dead frog floating in this one, and I tried to be Aaron Brockovich, and I was going to go down and get it, but I was scared to fall in. So I didn't get the frog, but there were dead animals that we often find in these areas. Now, I don't know how good this is showing up for you, but this water is water that was taken out of Lake Sakakawea a few years ago when my sister was swimming. This is the color of turquoise. This is where we get our drinking water from. We took to the North Dakota State Health Department, paid $200 out of our own pocket, only to be told it's a blue-green algae bloom and not to worry about it. Well, we never had these before, and now they are common occurrences just since the oil boom, and it's probably as a result of everything they're putting into the water, the dissolved solids that are going in there. This kills fish. There were dead fish on the shoreline because it takes the oxygen out of the water. We were told, well, what do we do about it? And I said, you're not supposed to be swimming in it. You definitely don't drink it. And this was 1 mile from a water intake plant where we took this water out of the lake. Now, just to remind you, the Lake Sakakawea is just a reservoir that was created in the 1950s as part of the Pick-Sloan Act to help reduce flooding in St. Louis and Missouri. That incidentally was flooding because of the Army Corps of Engineers. So they built a series of 5 dams. Each one of those dams backed up to a reservation. So in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, those big areas that you see are reservoirs that are dams. But that is the Missouri River. It's just kind of like a pollution holding pond now because of the oil industry before it continues on downstream throughout the rest of the country. So what happens in North Dakota doesn't stay in North Dakota. This is a picture of the Buttes from last July, 2014. We had a 1 million gallon toxic water brine spill. And in the front of the picture, you can see where the pipe broke and went down the hill. All of the vegetation is dead. Anything that that water touched went down into Bearden Bay. There's a creek. And if you can look, that creek goes out into the Missouri River. The EPA came in and did their own studies and conducted some testing and said it was fine. Our tribal council at the time said, oh, there were beaver dams that were along that creek. So the beaver dams stopped the pollution from going anywhere. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. Nobody even talked about how the beaver died. So we did an independent study and brought Duke University in to study the ground that still looks like this today. And they showed us that there are selenium, arsenic, selenium. There's a whole host of radioactive materials that are sitting on top of this ground that are beyond the level that humans are supposed to have, and it's just sitting there still today. Our tribe simply diluted it by putting fresh water down, and which is one of the worst things you can do. So we're still trying to investigate this particular spill, but keep in mind, this is just a big spill that happened last year, so it got national attention. These kinds of spills, whether they're small or large, happen every single day. Many of them go unreported, and they contain heavy metals, radioactive materials. Again, this shows where our reservation is, the site of the spill, the Missouri River, and how it goes on down through the country. I just like to show this because it talks about the volatile organic compounds that are in every major part of the oil and gas development that happens. National Geographic came out, they were going to cover our story, and they sort of beautified the flaring that happens in North Dakota. And I can tell you that there's nothing beautiful about the flaring. It looks like a war zone. You can stand on a butte at home and do a 360, and you see flares all the way around. It's disturbing that it would be beautified and be made to be something that was great for the country, when in fact it is not great for anybody. You see, in North Dakota, we're not even capturing the natural gas. They're just going after the oil in the fracking because companies do not want to spend the money that it takes to put in pipeline infrastructure. And so you can see the city of Minneapolis. How many of you have been to North Dakota? Raise your hand. Okay. So you may or may not know that there's not really any cities there in North Dakota. But if you look at the block information, it appears that there's a city bigger than Minneapolis. Well, that's not light pollution. That is just from the flaring that's happening in the Bakken. Here's another picture showing the United States, showing the Bakken region and the flares that are escaping into the night sky. These are photos courtesy of NASA. So the companies put up these nice signs for us: danger, hydrogen sulfide gas, poisonous gas, making presence. I'm standing there taking this picture, and I'm like, and I'm holding my breath until I jump back in the car. But what about the people that work on site? What about all that standing water that's all around there? Thanks, but no thanks, oil companies. This sign isn't going to help us. It's just a disclaimer for them. Their little tiny street of Main Street, this is what the truck traffic looked like until this year. They started in 2006 and just got a truck route that just opened a few months ago. Up until then, we had truck after truck after truck coming through our little communities. These trucks wreck on these back roads, which is very rural, and line up traffic for hours and hours and hours and cause additional accidents. This particular truck wrecked in a creek that went into the lake. My dad was hauling stuff for my cousin. She was going to get out of North Dakota and move to South Dakota because she couldn't handle the oil industry anymore. She was pregnant and didn't want to be around this area. They didn't even make it off the reservation before a truck slammed into them, drove them off the road, and caused them to wreck. This happens often on our reservation lands. And thank God my uncle and my brother were okay. They got scrapes and bruises. But you know what? Not everybody is okay. In 2008, my friend Cassie was driving home from Minot on Highway 23. A semi-truck was passing her, and it cut her off, and it landed on the top of her cab, and it crushed her. So that when we had her funeral, all we had to look at and to say goodbye to was a picture. And she was 23 years old. This was in 2008. Kathy was the first fatality by truck. Since then, there have been over 40 deaths from truck traffic alone. In addition to that, we have had a big influx of drugs because drugs follow money. We have MS-13, which is an organized gang, a very scary gang on our community, little tiny community, where we have people that are shooting out, police chases, I mean, just things you would hear about in movies before. And we also, as a result, have heroin on our reservation. These are all symptoms of the oil and gas industry coming to a small community and having people have money. Ashley was my brother's stepdaughter. She died a year ago because she couldn't get off the heroin. She was 25 years old. My friend Lisa died less than a year ago because she couldn't get off the heroin, and there aren't services here enough for all of the madness that's happening to help our people. And in fact, most of our people are either getting arrested or sent to jail, and instead of being helped. Lisa has 5 kids that she left behind. In fact, her daughter's picture on Facebook shows a picture of her holding her mom's hand in the hospital while she lay there dying. She fought for 3 days. That's her organ shut down. These areas of fracking can happen anywhere. These blue bins start showing up, and then you know they're about to do a frack job. This particular frack job was right over the hill from the cemetery where we were burying my grandmother that day. Considered a sacred site to us. But they don't care about us alive, much less care about us when we're dead, so they site these things anywhere. This is the picture of the trailer court. When I told you that we got pushed out, they literally put up a fence and told us we couldn't access our homes. We had to get out. They took the doors off of some of the trailers to kick some of the native people out of the trailer court. Again, remember, this rail line was owned by Warren Buffett that we were going up against, and so we didn't have any choice but to just move. Again, forced relocation. These frack filters started showing up all over the reservation. This one was found by a 5-year-old girl. She was playing with it. Any human being should not be exposed to more than 5 picocuries of radioactive material. This was measured by a Geiger counter, which measures up to 1,000 picocuries. It was off the charts. More than 1,000 picocuries. What's going to happen to that 5-year-old baby that was playing with this? We don't know. We started putting out our own grassroots efforts and saying, look, danger, do not touch. And I know that those symbols don't reflect radioactivity, but this is just a grassroots effort to let people understand how dangerous this kind of stuff is that's being illegally dumped. These trucks come up to our cisterns where people fill up their own water for their houses and started taking our water right out of our drinking water areas. And the next person to come along wouldn't even know that this guy was sitting there putting all this water, which has flowback and chemicals in it. But this is what they get away with on the reservation. And yet our tribal council said, welcome to Mandaree, heartbeat of the Bakken. They welcomed these people in. They said, look at all the jobs that are created. North Dakota, you should be happy as a whole and as a state because your unemployment rate has gone down. The unemployment rate in 2011 was 3.5. But if you look back to 2005, our unemployment rate was always between 3 and 4%. They tell North Dakotans, you should be happy for all the jobs that are created in North Dakota. Well, in 1 year, we had a population increase in North Dakota of over 11,000 people. And we had a job creation of over 10,000 jobs. 11,000 people came, 10,000 jobs were created. That doesn't leave a lot of leftover jobs for the people that are actually living in the state of North Dakota and will be here when the oil boom leaves. But all the transient workers get to leave and go back to where they came from after they're done destroying the land, sterilizing our land. Man camps started popping up all over the place, literally thousands and thousands of people living in trailers and in RV parks and wherever they could sleep, wherever they could find somewhere to be. They started coming out into North Dakota and weatherizing their little RV trailers so that they could work out here. And what happened with the man camps is that we started getting a lot of incidents of violence against women, a lot of rape started occurring. It started going on the rise. It increased by 163% rapes after the oil boom started. And this is what they had to leave us. This was their thank you for our tribal council opening up the door for them and saying they could come in here. There was a 4-year-old girl that was walking away from one of those man camps that was found naked. She had been violated several times. And this is how they think us. These are just local newspaper headlines that I took directly from local newspapers. People getting murdered, babies getting shot up. This FBI investigation, the murder of women and her 3 grandchildren on Fort Berthold, happened 1 street up from my mom's house. Some really bad people came in there and started shooting because this woman, who was the mother of these children, owed them money. So they found her family and they killed her children and her parents 1 street up from my mom's house. That's just one story. I could tell you so many more. missing in 2013. He was with known MS-13 gang members. The story was that they were raping one of my cousins and he tried to help her, but they were all doing some kind of heroin dealing. So my cousin got away, but he went missing. We searched for him for a year and we found him under the bridge in Lake Sacagawea. Since he wasn't stabbed or shot, it was considered an accidental drowning. Case closed. But we don't have a choice as community members to not fight back. We don't have a choice to just sit around and let it continue to happen. We organize in our communities and we push back and we fight back against the industry because our babies and our future, their lives are at stake. And we understand this as community members. We tell the truckers we don't want them here. We put our signs up. We protest when we can. There's only a handful of us that are actually pushing back. The others are just taking the money and shooting their jeep or else moving if they can move. But not us. We have to stay and we have to fight. I organized an extreme extraction energy summit in North Dakota just about 3 weeks ago. We brought people from over 30 states and 3 countries to Newtown, North Dakota. We did a protest outside that rail terminal that I showed you. The cops showed up. The people from the thing showed up. They said we were trespassing. I had permission to go out here. This was on the local news saying no charges will be pressed against these individuals. So we were all happy about it, like, woo, it made the 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock news. And we're going to continue to push back against these people because they have no business coming in and destroying our land and then sending that stuff. This is just an example. This is just the proposed Sandpiper pipeline that we are also fighting. But we know that there's rail and there's trains that are coming your guys' way as well, the other direction. This just shows you that all of that hurt, that craziness, literally is coming down the track, literally is coming down the pipe to other people across the country. That kind of negativity, that kind of sick mentality that comes with fossil fuel extraction is what carries out through the rest of the country and causes these problems. We need to get off our addiction to oil as a country. We need to know that even in South America, we have our brothers and sisters that are fighting too, and we're here to say that they don't stand alone. As Indigenous peoples of the Americas, we're standing together. Because if this is happening on a reservation in the United States, imagine how bad it is in some of the jungle areas in South America when people disappear. We cannot protect our future generations unless we stop this madness, unless we pull away from fossil fuels in general and go through a just transition towards a renewable energy economy. It's no coincidence that when we're pregnant, our babies are carried in water. Water is life, and we know that. And as women, we are defending water. We are on the front lines defending water because we are defending life. It's sacred to us. And this is a picture. Literally seconds after my daughter was born, they put her on my chest. And it was a moment that makes me fight even harder than before she was born. We have to speak for all those who do not have a voice. Not just the babies and the future generations, but the fish. All of the things that swim, the four-legged, the winged, they don't have a say in their poisoning. And we, as warriors, are going to fight back and have our little future power shifters. And we're going to teach them the right way across the land because they're going to be the future leaders of this country that are going to make the right decision. Thank you very much.
Kandi, and we're so glad that Skype allows us to hear from you at the same time you're able to stay and work with your community and your family. So thank you for being with us. We usually hear about the Bakken oil shale basin in two contexts. One is how wonderful it is that the U.S. is getting more energy independent, with North Dakota as the #2 source in oil. The other context are the oil trains that are coming from North Dakota into Washington, and if the terminal is built at Grace Harbor in Vancouver, more and more will be coming. And we've had these exploding oil trains, 43 dead in a folk music club in Quebec 2 years ago. Every month or 2 months, it seems that there's another train exploding. But it's important to tell our public officials. President Sharp is talking now to the governor, why she can't be staying with us later this morning. But to tell our public officials that even if those trains were 100% safe, we still need to be paying attention to what happens at the front end, where the oil is fracked in North Dakota, and at the back end, when it's loaded onto tankers right by the salmon and shellfish and birds in Grace Harbor. So we're switching gears now from the oil train route from North Dakota to the coast to the coal train route from the Powder River Basin of Montana and Wyoming to proposed coal terminals, in particular near the Lummi Nation at Cherry Point. And here to speak with us about that is Jeremiah J. Julius, who's an officer secretary of the governing body of the Lummi Indian Business Council, the governing body of the Lummi Nation. He was instrumental in moving the Lummi Nation to affirm no position regarding the proposed coal terminal at Cherry Point. He was later appointed leader of the operational team that's responsible for protecting that area. As a fisherman and crabber, he understands the importance of fishing for the way of life and the heritage of the Lummi people. He's been a successful private entrepreneur and accumulated a wealth of business experience. He currently shares his passion for business, self-improvement, and leadership through his life coaching practice. And this isn't the first time Jay's been at Evergreen. A few years ago, maybe when people weren't listening as much, there was a small crowd who came to listen, and promised him at that time we'd have a larger crowd at Evergreen to listen to what he has to say. So welcome back to Evergreen.
Wow, I wish you would put coal trains first. That's tough to follow. Aishka, CM, Nishalcha, CM, Watatlam, Sunisnat, Slailton, Sunisnat. Watatlam was my great-great-grandfather's name. His English name was Felix Solomon. My grandfather was Vernon Lane, grandmother Nancy Lane Solomon. On my father's side, my father was Mike Julius. Haynes Julius was his father. Bela Jefferson, his mother. Bela Jefferson's great-great-great-grandfather signed the treaty in 1855, the Point Elliott Treaty. And ever since I was a very young child, I was whether it was sitting at the table or whatever the case may be, fishing with my grandpa or uncles, the treaty was always in the conversation and pounded into our spirits and souls, and getting a really true understanding of what it meant and the sacrifices our people went through. And I didn't know it growing up as a young child. Sports and other things were really important to me, and fishing. But it wasn't until I got to a certain age that I realized that, like Kandi, we are called, and each and every one of us here, we're called to serve a purpose. We're called to do some things, and it's our job and our duty, I think our sacred duty, to allow ourselves or allow something greater than us to expose that greater purpose, that sacred purpose. And some are small, some are minor, some are just teaching children certain things like we're learning today and doing today. Some are great at a higher level. And I love the teachings that we're taught and the way we were 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago, is none of us are up here and others are down here, we're all equal. I'm reading a book right now that I think what I got out of the first, actually just the introduction, I want to start with that, because to understand the battle that we face today with the largest proposed coal port in North America going onto our sacred lands, our homeland territory, our ceded territory, and adjacent to our reservation, one must understand the history. And I think that anyone here read The Lonely Road to Fate?
We'll have audio back in a second. Apologies.
If there's more to life, once you reach financial success or whatever your goals are, you ever feel like you're missing something or empty? And it led to a conversation, but it really led me home, because I've always wanted to come home, back to my people, back to my nation, back to my homelands. And really finding that balance, which is really tough. It's an inner battle, it's an inner conflict that we're all going to face forever, but recognizing is what's important, I found. So, first of all, Kandi, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And thank you for exposing us to, and others to what a lot of us do. A lot of that takes place all throughout the country. There are books, there are documentaries that expose it.
Don't get a lot of public exposure. A couple of weeks ago, I watched National Geographic, and I'm not sure if it was Drugs Inc. or something like that, but it was exactly what we were talking about. And they had individuals who were former employees of the oil companies who became meth addicts and heroin addicts. And that individual, one of the individuals, actually passed away a week or two after the filming of that documentary. But that exposed, but it didn't go into depth about the reservation and a lot. Didn't go into. So what caught my attention is there was an arrest taking place on the reservation, and so it made me stay on that channel. But I just want to thank you, and thank you for standing strong and being a warrior for your people, and really answering that calling and not backing down. My hands, and our hands go up to you. Adam 2 is a eulogy-inspired life, living out your eulogy. And Kandi, you're setting an example by leading by example, by doing. And that's Adam 2, living out your eulogy. Adam 1 is resume, inspired life, building your resume. So it's interesting. It's really interesting to think of it that way. In 1855, Lummi Nation, along with many other tribes, you can look at the treaty, the Wamish, the Quamish, and other tribes, entered into a treaty in 1855. And a lot of perception is it's a pretty old treaty, 160 years old right now, January 22nd, 1855. But prior to that, what did this landscape look like? Prior to that, what is now Washington State look like? What did the rivers look like? What did the mountains, what did the trees look like? Look at this longhouse. How many longhouses were littered along the rivers? Villages that were our homes. Villages that we occupied for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years since time immemorial. And that's not just something we say anymore. Now you've got archaeologists and studies that have studied the bones and the bones of our people, and artifacts validating that. Cheyenne, Cherry Point, 3,500-year-old artifacts and human remains extracted since the 50s. The very first documented archaeological site in Whatcom County. Now the proposal of the largest coal port in North America. But what did Cheyenne look like 300 years ago? How rich were the schools of salmon going by? What were the threats to the salmon back then? I have to share with you, the Lummi people, and the Tulalip people, and the natives that occupied this land had so much respect for the salmon. The Lummi people had so much respect for the salmon, we would face the salmon north towards the Fraser where it was going as we cleaned them and prepared them, gave thanks. Ultimate respect for the resources. Looked at them not as a monetary, something that we could make money from, but saw them as a gift from the Creator. We're taught that the Creator blessed us with a garden. Blessed us with a garden that consists of the natural resources like fish, deer, things that replenish themselves that don't require the planting of the seed. Things like the fish, the deer, the shellfish, the oysters. All of these things were taught were a natural garden that we were gifted with to take care of us. And it was our duty to protect and make sure that those resources weren't abused because they are a gift to us. And as we look at this panel and listen to the panel and listen yesterday and today and maybe tomorrow, I'm not sure how long this goes on, but you look at the very attacks. Yes, it's indigenous resources. Yes, it's indigenous justice, human rights, and many other things. But you look at, he stated, the salmon don't have a voice. The whales don't have a voice. These gifts from the Creator do not have a voice. And who is going to be the voice for them? Because, yes, what Chief Seattle said, when they are gone, we are gone too. the rivers, not too long ago, you could drink out of. My father grew up on a river. Around his same age, actually, he was born in 1955. A relative his same age just shared on a panel. It was when he was 6 years old that he could finally flick a switch. He walked over to the switch and said, it wasn't until I was 6 years old that I did this. We grew up so poor on the river, but we had everything. We were so poor we didn't even know. We needed fish, we needed shellfish, we never went hungry. There's no word in our language for famine. It wasn't too long ago that these rivers were pure. But as we reflect back and take ourselves back in time and take that journey, take that walk, read the books, get an understanding of what this land once produced in terms of the gifts from the Creator. What did it look like? And where are we at today? Because it's hard to really put it into perspective. My great-grandmother died in 1980. She was born in 1888. She died when I was 5. So to put it into perspective and to really get an understanding of what it once was, it's kind of hard to do today because this kind of controls our life, iPad, school, and then we go get a job and we're so busy, we kind of don't realize where we're at. We don't realize where Earth really is and the pains and the suffering that Mother Earth is going through. But if we take a moment to reflect and really take a look at what it once was, where we're at today, and really take to heart what Governor Inslee said in Years of Living Dangerously, a 6-part series that was on Showtime. He said, we are the first generation to feel the impacts of climate change. We are the last generation who can do anything about it. And when you really think about that, and you really take a look at where we once were and what this earth once was and the gifts that we've been blessed with and the damages that we have done, and you can look at hatcheries, you can look at salmon runs. It was all over the news yesterday about salmon runs. Fawn just shared Quinault only had 4,000 return. How many disasters have they declared over the last 20 years? Lummi Nation has declared salmon disasters. When we look at where we are, and like Obama said in Seattle, I had an opportunity to go down there a few weeks ago for Murray's campaign. And he said, if you go to 10 doctors and 9 of them tell you have diabetes, and one of them says, well, you don't really have diabetes, you're going to listen to the one or you're going to listen to the 9? You're going to listen to the 9 and do something about it, or you're going to listen to the 1 and go on eating McDonald's and Burger King and fast foods and sugar? And he kind of put it into perspective from that point, and he said, no, you listen to the 9, and that's where we're at with the scientists today on climate change. If 99% of the scientists say climate change is real and it's created by us, fossil fuels and things of that nature, do we listen to the 1% or do we listen to the 99%? And we have to do something about it. So we look at, I take myself back in time based on the stories that my great-great-grandmother shared and instilled within us, and the importance of maintaining our gratefulness for these gifts. But as Kandi does, standing up as a little, just one individual, standing up for the future generations, for you right now. But a basic Indigenous principle is to always think 7 generations ahead, as my ancestors did when they entered into that treaty in 1855. They were thinking about my kids, who were the 7th generation of the treaty signed. We've got to think about the 7th generation in the future, and if we keep going along this path and we take a look at where we're at, and it only took 160 years to get to where we're at today, actually maybe less. If you put that on a mathematical timeline, where we're going to be in the next 160 years, it's, I don't know, I'm not a mathematician or a scientist, I don't know, but it really concerns me It concerns me for future generations. So we all have to stand up. We all have to do something. And I don't know what each and every one of yours purpose is, but we all have to take a moral stance, whether little, large, whatever the case may be. So, we entered into the treaty in 1855. We can only imagine what this land once looked like 200, 300, 3,500, 9,000 years ago, according to the Columbia River. The tribes, Yakama, the tribes over there in the east, their ancestor. We can only imagine what they witnessed, the long lives they lived, the peace. 1855, we ceded every square inch of the land that the state now calls the States. It was once owned, every square inch of this land that we call home, it was once owned by an indigenous nation, native peoples, for thousands and thousands of years. We entered into a contract. We entered into an agreement. We didn't go to war. We're not a conquered people. We all entered into a treaty. According to Article 6 of the United States Constitution, the treaty is the supreme law of the land. We entered into that agreement understanding that we would get a little reservation. I was just reading the treaty in the Bellingham Herald yesterday because many, including Tulalip and Swinomish and Yakima and Lummi, stood before the White House and demanded honor the treaty rights. And in that article, I gave a little, you can click on that Treaty of Point Elliott, and in there, it only takes about 10 minutes to read. Not a lot to it. But we ceded every square inch of this land that is the state calls their own. But in the last 160 years, Lummi Nation has had 23% of their treaty protected fishing rights taken away. Whether it be ferries, whether it be industry, whatever the case may be. And we understand that there's a time and there's a need. There's a need for ferries. There's a need for certain things. But also for us as leaders of our nations and descendants of the ancestors who entered into that agreement, protecting just a few things, making sure our people had rights. There comes a time when we look at these oil trains and we look at these coal trains that there's a time we have to say no for the greater good of our people, for the greater good of this state. And that's where we're at today with Cherry Point. Cherry Point, like I said, was the first registered archaeological site in Whatcom County. It's 450001. 45WH001. From there, if you go to Western Washington University, and you go to the archaeologist there, she'll walk you through massive artifacts. She'll show you some human remains. And that's one of the things I share with the public because it's hard for me as a Native American to get across to just the average individual who is flooded with jobs and tax dollars for schools. And it's hard to overlook sacred sites, like Kandi said. Sometimes the government just doesn't care. They want to mitigate it. Well, let's just put 8 foot of fill over the top of the cemetery, and then we can develop on top of it and dump coal on top of it. And that's the mitigation. But what I share to a pastor who's a good friend of mine, what I share to the community when I'm given an opportunity to speak is, if Lummi Nation, if Tulalip, if Swinomish, if the tribe went and bought 1,000 acres within a county or a city, and within there was some crosses and stones, but they were going to do some development, would it be okay if they bulldozed over the top? Just wiped out the crosses and headstones, but promised to not hurt anything underneath. And if they did, they'll put together an inadvertent discovery plan, and if they do dig something up, they'll just go ahead and start at your local university. You know, and try to put it in perspective to the outside communities. Is that okay with you? I've lost many people in my life. I've lost grandparents, I've lost a child, I've lost a father, I've lost uncles. And I'll tell you right now, I would stand up and I would fight and I would die fighting to never let that take place to my family members at my cemetery. And I would hope that some of us would do the same. So that's my way to try to put it in perspective of what a sacred site is, because sacred seems to be used just for many things. But really, what is sacred? Is the river sacred to you? Is the clean water sacred to you? Is the groundwater sacred? Are the fish sacred to you? Maybe not. But I think life is sacred to all of us. I think future generations' life in good health is sacred to us and important to us. Maybe. So we're at ground zero, yes. Chicken is a fishing village site. Yes, it's considered Station B, and that's language specific in the treaty. 463 tankers, Capesize, coal tankers. How is that going to impact not just me as a fisherman, but how's it going to impact future generations? The sacrifices our people made, the agreement with the United States that we entered into protecting those very rights, protecting those villages and stations. And that's why the Lummi Nation is necessary to stand up. It's necessary to stand up to protect. It's necessary to fight if necessary. Because those rights, I have no right, and we have no right to strip unborn children who have equal rights of their rights in the future for decisions we allow to be made today. And that's why we must, and we're at a time where we have to fight. So, Fawn and others went through climate. I'm not a, I don't have, they're very educated and they understand statistics. I know coal dust and the dangers of coal dust. And we have 52 million tons of coal dust piled adjacent to my reservation. I know that that is not good for my people. I know that north at Tawasin, the business for cleaning windows because of the coal dust covering the windows is so horrific for people. It's created new opportunity for window cleaners. But I know when that coal dust gets into the little children and into our elders and into our people today, that's going to hurt and harm and pose a threat to the health of my people and to the cities adjacent, depending on which way the wind's blowing. And we get gusts of wind up there at Cherry Point, 60, 70 miles an hour. It's not uncommon. It blows. If this port runs at 99.99% perfection, that is equivalent to 1 teaspoon of coal per ton that will be discharged into the Salish Sea or to the surrounding areas. And that adds up to 500 tons of coal per year if it runs at 99.99% perfection. And that is not okay with me. That shouldn't be okay with the surrounding communities, cities, and residents of the area. If you go to Burlington Northern, they might have taken it off Warren Buffett's website, Burlington Northern Railroad, and look at how much coal, on average, is lost once it leaves the Powder River Basin and gets to where it's going. It's an astronomical number. That is not okay for the rivers and streams and the farmers who are growing the crops for us to consume. It's not okay. So, I think my time's up, but that's where Lummi Nation is at. And I thank you for letting me take you on a journey back in time to hopefully get a glimpse of what this place once was, to get a better understanding of the importance of the treaty, not just to the nations, not just to the tribal nations who ceded every square inch of this land that we call Washington State, but the importance to all of us, the importance of this state becoming a state in 1871, 16 years after we entered into these agreements, because the state would be a state without those agreements. And the billions and billions and billions and billions of tax dollars that are generated every year on this land is because of a treaty entered into. And I think that's important for all of us to understand that it's not just us. So it's important to honor that treaty. It's important to honor it not just for us, not just for the Native American, the tribes that cede the territory, but for the state as a whole. And that was shared with Governor Centennial Court a few weeks ago. So as we move forward, maybe if there's a desire to help, if there's anyone, or maybe social media that you can share, if you can reflect on the treaty yourself as a resident of Washington State, and find the importance of the treaty, not just to us, but to you, to all of us. Because there's a perception that these treaties stop industry and stop development. And that's so far from the truth. We're the #2 employer in Whatcom County, arguably #1. The number's $500 million that goes into the economy in the surrounding area for Lummi Nation. We are not job killers, but we have to find that balance between Adam 1 and Adam 2. What's okay? What's good? What's good development for future generations? Sustainability. So finding that balance is often a challenge for all of us. And as tribal leaders, it's really tough because we're put in a tough position. We have to protect future generations and resources for future generations. So with that, I say, Haishka, to each and every one of you, my hands are up to you, and know that you each have a purpose in Adam 2. And I encourage you, I think it's all of our duty to find that purpose. It doesn't have to be big, but there's some within all of us. Haishka, thank you.
And as a reminder for those who are wondering what we can do, there'll be workshops this afternoon after our lunch break at 1:30 to start talking about what people can do, what kind of responses are to the coal and oil trains, tribal resilience, and energy justice. Our final speaker before we open up for discussion is Adriann Killsnight, a Northern Cheyenne tribal member and owner of Blackbird Women Contracting and Environmental Consulting in Lame Deer, southeastern Montana. She's the technical coordinator for the Northern Cheyenne Tribe's Ecoregional Ethnographic Assessment Project, a collaborative effort of the tribe, Chief Dull-Knife College, and the U.S. Bureau of Land Management. She received her MS in Resource Management from Central Washington University and her BA in Environmental Studies from Montana State University, and drove from southeastern Montana to be here with us today along the coal train route, I'm assuming, and ran into a storm in the Bozeman area that slowed her down, that delayed her coming. So go figure, running into a storm on the way to a climate justice conference. We're so glad that you and your family are able to be with us, and the PowerPoint can be put in. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Well over, over three great presentations. And if you can bear with me, I'm still coming out of the cold. My throat's a little scratchy today. So anyhow, if I just jump right in. I've got nothing to share. na Berthold, which we had noticed na Mahio Mr. Norm, na Dukas, na Corelho, and Mahio Nemo, Mao, Yashiman. Good day, my name is Blackbird Woman, I'm the chief child, I am Cheyenne, and our way of life is holy. And I'm going to talk to you about Mother. It is our holy ground. Thank you. Okay. Here is a map displaying the proposed Tongue River Railroad and Otter Creek coal mine. They are in close proximity to the eastern boundary of the Northern Cheyenne Reservation and are within the ancestral territory of the Northern Cheyenne people. The Powder River Basin produces 40% of the nation's coal. The Northern Cheyenne lies within the Powder River Basin. This coal mine and railroad would increase the pressure for the tribe to be exploited for their resources, their coal resources. And you can see there's a map on the left there as well. I don't have a pointer, but the Powder River Basin there in the map there, it's in the right map there in the white. Northern Cheyenne is just adjacent to that. This is an image of the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. It is located in southeastern Montana. It is approximately 444,000 acres, with over 11,000 enrolled tribal members. This is another map. Show. Okay, so the Northern Cheyenne tribe has had a long history of fighting resource exploitation. They've been fighting to protect this traditional way of life on their land, which has been undercut for centuries. And it's just not coming out of nowhere. It's nothing new. It's been continuous. And an example here, I have a timeline here. I'm not going to go too much into detail on this, but since the 70s, this is an example of the Northern Cheyenne designated their airshed as Class 1 air, and they were the first tribe to do so. We have in the 80s where the feds were trying to use coal in the Powder River Basin, and the Northern Cheyenne tribe challenged them and won. And so this is just to give you an idea of some of the, I'm just going to touch, I'm going to go real, not going to go into detail on much, but basically this is the history of the Northern Cheyenne tribe trying to protect their environment, their cultural and natural resources. And here is a map here of proposed development. Now they're proposing to build this coal mine in Otter Creek Valley, and they need a railroad to get that coal to the market. It shows here where the routes are proposed near the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. The industry wants the coal ship route, which is there north of the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in the green, and this railroad runs near the Northern Cheyenne Reservation to Kosher, which already has one of the largest coal-fired power plants in the U.S. And this coal is to be transported to ports here on the West Coast to be transferred out to China. And so, this is important to the Northern Cheyenne tribe, the Otter Creek Valley, both the Otter Creek and the Tongue River valleys. They are located where Northern Cheyenne originally homesteaded. Even though it's located off the reservation on the eastern boundary there, it is still really important to the Northern Cheyenne people and tribe. There were 46 Northern Cheyenne families that were originally homesteaded in the Otter Creek Valley. Okay, here, essentially, okay, so the proposed coal mine in Otter Creek, the coal lease is owned by Arch Coal for 1.5 billion tons in the Otter Creek Valley. It is the largest proposed coal mine in the country. The Northern Cheyenne tribe is concerned because of the severe adverse impacts on the tribal members and on the reservation environment, their homeland. This is an image of the Otter Creek Valley taken by Alexis Bonagowski from the National Wildlife Federation. Just to give you an idea of what it looks like there in the valley. And So the only way that they can get the coal from the Otter Creek Valley to the market is through a railroad. This railroad is co-owned by Arch Coal, Burlington Northern, and Forest Smarts. The railroad is proposed to be built by the Tongue River through private ranches, an Amish community, and through important cultural and historic sites to both Northern Cheyenne and Sioux tribes and other tribes. In order to build a railroad, they would have to confiscate private property to build this railroad. There's an image of the Tongue River there. It's an important waterway for the Northern Cheyenne. It helps the eastern boundary of the reservation, south and southeastern boundary. So one of the many steps, hold on a second, it's kind of jumping around here. Okay, so here is an image of some partnerships that the Northern Cheyenne is not the only people fighting against fighting for the Otter Creek Valley and the Tongue River Valley. There's a group of private landowners, ranchers. We have environmental groups, grassroots groups. We have Sierra Club, People Cheyenne, that have all come together to protect and help fight for the Otter Creek and Tongue River Valleys. This is all in order to protect traditional lands for both natives and non-natives. And here I just have a photos of some folks that have been on the ground. We have other tribes as well, the Lummi, and we have quite a list of folks that are coming together in alliance with this effort to protect these old valleys. This year, on September 21st, the Northern Cheyenne Tribe unanimously approved a resolution upholding the Tongue River Railroad and stating that the tribe believes that the direct and long-term cultural and environmental impacts of the proposed Tongue River Railroad project would be devastating to the communities on and near the reservation, which is a huge decision that has been recently been made by the tribal council. Okay, so climate change is influencing tribal lands and resources in many ways. For example, average temperatures rising, increasing droughts, snow patterns declining, water supplies are diminishing. All of these things, all of these changes undermine the ecological health of tribal lands and impact the quality of life for not only tribes but for all people, all mankind, and the animals. So the Northern Cheyenne Tribe is taking steps to protect their cultural and natural resources, and one of these efforts, essentially, that is ongoing to protect cultural and natural resources, I'd like to mention is Ecoregional Ethnographic assessment that I've been involved with now, which is going on the third year. And so essentially, this is a collaborative, multidisciplinary project. And I'm working with the Northern Cheyenne Tribe, it's the Chief Elmer College, and USBLM, Bureau of Land Management. And this effort is to protect Northern Cheyenne's important cultural and natural resources from climate change and other detrimental impacts caused from either development, invasive species, and wildfire, things like that. And so this is a pilot project of the BLM and the Northern Cheyenne has begun, and all of this effort is to start looking at ways that we can protect those things, because we are connected to our land, all our plants, our animals, and a lot of these things are used in ceremonies. And so how does that affect ceremonies if we can no longer use something? And so we're collecting ethnographic interviews from elders. We have a lot of elders that are knowledgeable, that have stories that are no longer here. And so a lot of this this project is combining all that information, and we're going to store that data into a database, and it will be housed at the local tribal college in Lander at the Chief Donor College. And so this is kind of a way to start identifying what's important, what's vulnerable to climate change as far as our resources go, and maybe developing strategies to start either protecting or preparing ourselves for change, for that kind of change. And so this is just, I didn't want to go into too much, but my base of the project, I'm doing the plants and animals. It has a spatial component to it, looking at habitat types, things like that. And so it's been an ongoing thing, and it's definitely been interesting, and it's a great tool. It'll be a tool for our decision makers to use in maintaining our resources, able to make better decisions and develop strategies. So anyway, with that, I just wanted to share that with you. And just as you know, a lot of our tribes have different animals and plants that we're connected to, and so these are three of the animals that I wanted to share with you. They're used in ceremonies, or they're pretty much all ceremonial animals, and the plants too, for subsistence and also for ceremonial use. And so, and then our places, our sacred sites, our historical sites, places that we're connected to. And so a lot of this type of information is going to be stored in that database as well. And it's a big undertaking. Our Aboriginal Northern Cheyenne Aboriginal territory is huge, and so we've had to confine our study area several times, and it's down to the Powder River Basin area, and that's huge in the Powder, So with that, I was thinking about the Powder River Basin being, the largest coal-producing site, and so it definitely puts a little bit of pressure on us to try to gather as much information as we can in order to protect our resources. So, and anyway, so I just wanted to share that with you today, and I appreciate your time and the option. So.
My name is Ismael Tekwa. I'm the captain of the ATNI group here in Seattle, Seattle. I'm also a student here in the Research Rebels. I just wanted to take time to mention that we've been giving some gifts as part of the culture of honoring the people who honor us with their presence and their words and their stories. And we're really grateful and honored for all the people that come to the symposium, to share their stories with us, to make the things that we study real. But some of these gifts that we have that were made by a group that I'm working with at Cedar Creek Correction Center. It's a Masawa cultural group, and it's made up of indigenous people, natives from locally from here, and Navajo people and Lakotas and Aztec Mexica people, and it's a group where we're working through Native solidarity and culture and our tradition through Aztec dance specifically to build these relationships. And they made these gifts, and so part of their healing, making these gifts, we wanted to share it with the speakers. And we're going to try and get our sister Kandi to make sure she receives something. We'll send it to her. But I just wanted to share that with you. And thank you, speakers, on behalf of our brothers at Cedar Creek Correction Center, on behalf of the students here at in Research Rebel class and the Evergreen community. Thank you. Plaza Tamaki.
So we're going to open it up to discussion, but first, a couple of announcements. One is that to make sure that you register at the registration table, our students can show you where, because we're going to be planning a second annual Indigenous Climate Justice Symposium, and want to make sure that you're on the list for receiving information about that. There's also plenty of free materials, free literature, as well as the bookstore. The Evergreen bookstore is selling related books, including the project's book, Asserting Native Resilience, Pacific Rim Indigenous Nations, Asserting Native Resilience, Pacific Rim Indigenous Nations Facing Climate Crisis. Also, Freddie Lane showed a video yesterday on the Lummi Totem Pole journey, which you can also purchase back there and add one of the tables. I think this one might actually be there. So we wanted to just quickly announce the workshops that are coming up after lunch. There are 2 sessions, and you have your choice of 2 in each of the sessions. The first would be in this room at 1:30 with Julius and Adriann Killsnight, along with Beth Jolio from Power Pass Coal, to look at responding to coal terminals and trains, what people can do about it. There will also be a session with Adam Ospakov, who's Snoqualmie Tribe Cultural Resource Compliance Manager, and Freddie Lane from Lummi, on tribal community resilience and youth involvement. So those are the 2 in the first session. That one would be in the Cedar Room across the hall. Then the second session would be responding to oil terminals and trains. Kandi would be rejoining us for that, along with Arnie Martin and Jude Armstrong from Citizens for Clean Harbor, which are fighting the oil terminals plan for Hoquiam. And also in the Cedar Room at the same time, Tom Goldtooth, Executive Director of the Indigenous Environmental Network, who spoke with us last night, will be returning to discuss what we can do in terms of Indigenous rising and global climate change. And we'll also come back together. Karen will lead a session of when we all come back together from those workshops, and really looking forward to what we can do as our community. So we wanted to open it up at this point. Oh, and one other announcement. Tomorrow in Seattle, there's going to be a climate justice march beginning at 11 a.m. From the Beacon Food Forest on Beacon Hill, led by the Filipino community who mobilized 2 years ago in response to Typhoon Haiyan, the anniversary of that typhoon. And so if you're in Seattle tomorrow, that'll be another place to hear some voice and to actually get involved. So we wanted to open it up to questions. There'll be someone going around with a mic for questions for either Kandi. Again, President Sharp had to meet with the governor, and so couldn't stay with that question. But either for Kandi Mossett, Adriann Killsnight, and Julius.
And my question's for Adriann. So our electricity comes from Puget Sound Energy. Now, Puget Sound Energy is the #1 stakeholder in Colstrip. And when I say our, I mean the energy that powers Lummi Nation and Bellingham, Whatcom County, and Skagit River Valley people, and Swinomish, and the Squally people, and Olympia, and Suquamish, and Bay Regina, and Kitsap County. So 30% of our lights come from that plant. And hearing your story makes me feel extremely called to help transition our communities. Because it's clear to me that our use and our consumption is what's causing that pollution and that devastation, and has been. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on ways that we can utilize the true story of what's actually happening and where our power is coming from to help mobilize the transition here, to you consuming less and to transitioning our community. If you can speak to that for me.
I don't know if I can answer that. That's a very good question. It's, that's the conundrum. We, a lot of it, we rely on energy for a lot of things. And, there's so much, I guess, when we talk about alliances at home, it makes me think about a lot of the arguments that are made about, well, we use energy, everybody turns the light on, and it's true. It's just, as consumers too, it makes us think about, is this really necessary? Is this something I want? Because, all these things that we think are important, I guess, as
Yeah, we lost audio. Waiting for it to come back. Sorry about that.
Okay. Okay, so that was the panel on fossil fuels and transportation, looking at both ends of coal trains and oil trains. Some hard words, some things that were probably difficult to hear. Um, Somebody asked, what the hell does this have to do with Bernie? I believe Bernie's against the KXL pipeline. Just because it's supposedly dead doesn't mean it stopped. Doesn't mean that that's the worst thing that's going on right now. Some of the words that we listened to from Fort Berthold were pretty hard to hear. Celeste Holmes asks if crop yields are declining, what is happening to the health of the people? Well, all you have to do is look in Indian country at any of the statistics of mortality and life expectancy and women dying in childbirth and any of the other measures that you want to look at. If you know, you look at what kind of nutrition people are getting, that is a direct impact. The diabetes epidemic, you could go on and on and on and on and on. How many tribes are left in the U.S. recognized and not? The and not part is a little bit difficult. There's 567 federally recognized tribes and 66 state recognized tribes. How many are left to be recognized is a difficult number to arrive at. For instance, I know about the Lummi who are in North Carolina. They were recognized until the 1950s Relocation and Termination Act. They were offered money, like all the other tribes were, for tribal members to leave the reservation and go, most of them, to Baltimore for work. And then once enough people left the reservation, then the federal government terminated their recognition and status as a federally recognized tribe. So there's the number is a little bit difficult to determine. At any rate, I appreciate you guys coming out and listening. And next week on Native Life, we have our regularly scheduled program. We'll be doing Veterans Day program, looking at the history of, since this is Native American History Month, the history of the Native participation in the U.S. military. Does anybody else in the production room have anything else they want to add?
We have Sean with us. Sean, do you want to come in?
Sure.
Sean, why don't you introduce yourself, since you're new to the Bernie 2016 viewing audience. And
Sure.
I know you're in the Seattle area. Do you want to address some of the things that you heard today? And because you're up in that area?
Yeah, well, I'm from the Seattle area, and I actually go up north to like Anacortes and near the Swinomish tribes area, and so I actually see the oil trains going through there on the BNSF rail line, I believe, and they've recently been trying to bring a suit against the railroad the Swinomish tribe has, because they claim that they're sending too many trains through, and so there's lots of this sort of controversy going on, and it's all kind of linked to big rail. Warren Buffett is I believe is the owner of BNSF, and he's, I think, the second biggest railway manufacturer or operator in the country. And so, we've got lots of this big money, and actually the commissioner, the port commissioner positions up here aren't actually very high profile. They're not bringing in tons of money, but this most recent election, they certainly were higher than usual. So it's just showing how much this is becoming an issue for advocates of, environmental advocates, but also that now the companies are seeing that this is becoming more of a fight, and so they're putting more money into races to make sure that they elect people in those areas that will pass, things that'll make it for good business. So it's just, really interesting to hear from a more, from other people around the area who have, more of a history here. I was born in California. I just came up, with my parents, but I love this area, and it's really got a lot of, great things going for it as far as advocacy groups and goes. And there's been, a lot of recent talk about this, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more in the future. And that's why we have to continue to put out these sort of things, because mass media and corporate media are certainly don't have incentives to report on this sort of thing. So
yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into the area. I'll be moving there in another 7 months.
Oh, okay. To ride around Seattle or some sort of surrounding area?
Well, my only goal is west of the Cascades and in Washington State somewhere.
Nice, nice.
I'm fortunate in that I can take my telecommute job with me, and so as long as I have internet, it really is not, a geographical location is not as necessary as the internet connection will be.
Right. Yeah. 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 Well, it'll be great to have more like-minded individuals to push, the local narrative. And I'm just a local independent journalist that loves the volunteer effort that Border 2016 represents, and it definitely needs to be more of this as part of the grassroots movement to revolutionize media and politics, and it's all part of the good movement. So
okay, does anybody have anything else that they want to bring forth, or are we done for the day?
Did I already plug the Network of the 99, Pat?
Not yet.
All right. Coming with my plug here. Hey everybody, John Ellis, the guy who sits behind the screens, and we've done what I've done here to try to get us all free of the corporate media distortion that's occurring with our political speech is we're going to build a feed of our own. I've got all the pieces in place. I just need your help to fund it. And I know it's a lot to ask of everybody right now, especially that we've got holidays coming up. We've got political candidates to support, but we're not getting the truth out of our media feed. And we saw what CNN did to the debate, how they cut out pieces that were important, how they misinterpreted, how they rearranged the context to suit their own need. And that's not acceptable. That's not acceptable. That's our political speech. It's protected under the First Amendment. They have no right to do that. Between them and YouTube, they've got this lockdown, and it's actually happened since 2008, and it hasn't just happened to it's not just happening to us. This is to Bernie 2016 TV. It's happened to other politicians in the past. The McCain campaign, the Romney campaign. It's Republicans and Democrats. Everybody faces the same copyright infringement issues with YouTube and the corporate media, even the ones that you would think support their candidates. So this is just ridiculous. This here is a crowd fund. Which I will take the money and use it to purchase an LU500 unit and a lot of other technology that will give us our own stream. And I promise you, I will deliver the political news with this, and we will choose our candidate with this stream, and we will not have to look at or listen to any of the crap that comes out of any corporate media, because we're working on accreditation, and we will be going to the White House with this. So I need your help. Help me raise the money to get these things. This will cover the 2016 election cycle. And the video explains a lot more of that. All right, back to you, Pat.
Okay. Well, I guess that's it for today. We'll see everybody next week on Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. The song that we're leaving on is called The Crane. It's by Bamua. And it talks about how the crane comes and brings the various seasons. That comes in the spring, it leaves in the fall, it lives in the air and on the water, and the people are grateful for having cranes in their lives. So, John, if you could roll that beautiful bean footage, we'll be out of here.
guys feeling it? Right now. This song goes out to all listeners in Alaska and all of you. And John Bigaya, who wrote it, it's called The Praise.
하규가 등하니까 하규가 뭐 등하니까 오빠가니야 응나니야 하규가 등하니까 Koyana, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Huge